Hello, and welcome to Mary Spring Nature Center's Tuesday Talks. I'm John Fromer, your host and the program director. Today's talk is generously sponsored by Camden River House, Camden National Bank, and Rennie's A Maine Adventure. Mary Spring is open every day of the year, dawn to dusk, free of charge. And you can visit Mary Spring online anytime at maryspring.org on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Mary Spring's mission is to practice, teach, and advocate sound principles of ecology, conservation, and horticulture in order to protect our natural environment and to provide natural landscapes and cultivated areas for public enjoyment. There are many benefits to being a member of Mary Spring Nature Center, including free admission to our spring, summer, and winter lecture series, 10% discount on most purchases, a share of the stewardship, and reciprocating privileges to more than 345 gardens nationwide. Mary Spring is a 501c3 nonprofit organization primarily funded through memberships, grants, and donations. You can donate securely online at maryspring.org. You can give us a call with your credit card at 207-236-2239 or mail your check made out to Mary Spring Nature Center and send it to P.O. Box 893, Camden, Maine 04843, and we thank you. This program was originally recorded on Tuesday, March 25th, 2025, entitled Pesticide Practices and IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, presented by Hillary Peterson and Gary Fish of the Maine Department of Agriculture. Pre-recorded Tuesday talks uploaded to Mary Spring's YouTube channel are generously sponsored by the Cascade Foundation.
Well, I'm going to get right to it. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to be here this afternoon. First thing I just want to point out here, if you take a picture of your computer screen right now, you should be able to click that QR code in the picture, and that will bring you to a clickable PDF of today's presentation. I always try to make my presentations be both presentations and sort of little clickable guides for resources. So in the bottom right-hand corner, let me turn on my little laser pointer. In the bottom right-hand corner of all the slides will be photo credits and then also links to the different sources where the information's coming from. So I guess the expanded title of this presentation today is Garden Pesticide Practices and IPM for Pesky Insects, Weeds, and More. It's a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. And really going back to the most basics of basics is the question, what is a pest? And it's maybe a little more philosophical than you might think at first when you hear that, because different insects and plants and diseases can range from being beneficial to neutral to sort of incidental, meaning sometimes there are problems, sometimes they're not, to something that's causing low damage, and then finally something that's causing high damage. And high damage can come from both just the feeding of the feeding of the insect itself, but oftentimes insects can spread disease along with that feeding. But for every different organism out there that we may consider a pest in one scenario, might not be so much of a pest in another scenario. Scenarios and factors can include context, perception, personal allowance, understanding, population size, etc. And one example I love to give here is a yellow jacket. So if you have a garden with a bunch of caterpillar pests and it's next to the woods and there's a yellow jacket nest out there, that yellow jacket's actually going to be beneficial for you because they're voracious predators. They might help you with a little bit of biocontrol in your garden. Now, if that yellow jacket nest instead is maybe hung over the door of an elementary school with kids that have an allergy to yellow jackets, completely different. That's a high damage scenario. So this is the reason I'm laying this groundwork out for the rest of this presentation is whatever context you have, there may be a little bit more damage that you can allow depending on the pest and the situation. And so I'm the Integrated Pest Management Specialist at DACF, and this is sort of a slide I love to use in every single talk. There's all these different ways you could break IPM down, lots of different definitions, but I like to break it down this way. So integrated pest management broadly is using the full toolbox that you have to deal with pest situations. And so what that toolbox really should always include is identification. You have to identify something properly and able to understand its biology and understand the system in which that species is going to thrive. Once you understand that system, then you can prevent it. And so that's sort of the next step, both prevention and mechanical control. So like with a mouse, like a mouse trap. But prevention, preventing and controlling through physical means, so maybe netting, and again, setting your location up for success. Happier plants do better. Monitoring and record keeping. I'm a big Excel nerd. I love record keeping. It's really important to monitor things in a tracked and systematic way and really making it useful for the future, getting as much information as you can down. We'll talk about that a little more in a bit. Action thresholds. This is a term that originated in agriculture, but it's broadly the question of how much damage are you willing to tolerate on your plants so that the insects out there have something to eat, and in what situations are you willing to tolerate that or not? And then finally, both biological and pesticide control. This is going to be dynamic and flexible as methods change. So these are sort of the different things we're going to be talking about today. This IPM, these different terms can sort of also be on a cycle. I like to present this cycle every time. It kind of goes on forever. You could start anywhere. Say you keep really good records of your garden this year. You have a pest issue. You try something out. You take good notes of what you did. And then you really stop and analyze, did it work or did it not work? And what do you want to try again next year? Then you monitor for that same pest again. And say the pest problem started in April this year, starting in April next year, you can kind of start looking out for it. I love this picture, and I, again, include this in many presentations because it gets at the complexity of IPM and all the work that goes into always building new methods that can be used. So this is from a review paper in 2021 that pulled together all of the research that had gone into controlling and figuring out systems for farmers to use with the invasive spotted-winged Drosophila. And so each of these different points here, this is prevention, cultural practices. So we have mass trapping, protective coverings, pruning, mulching, drip irrigation. We have biological practices. We have natural enemies. We have CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, chemical practices. Every single one of these points here is a different research study that probably a PhD student along with a huge lab worked on together to make all these methods really things that growers can use. So this is what I love about it. It's a team effort. And another thing I want to talk about before delving into some of the pests today is organisms and life histories are really complicated. So if you just Google Colorado potato beetle life cycle, there's this pretty little simple picture here. Larva, pupa, beetle, egg, larva. It's simple. It looks, okay, easy. But things are always a lot more complicated than this. And this is a graphic made by Dr. Andre Aliokin up at UMaine. He has a website, potatobeetle.org. And this shows all the different things going on at once. And I think, again, it's just a nice way to illustrate how complicated these things really are. And so I mentioned action thresholds before. And so just a little more details about that. Action thresholds are that you need to decide the level of pests and damage when you're going to be implementing a management action to control the pest population. And broadly, I'm presenting this because I think sometimes we forget that we don't always have to manage a pest that we see, or we can do it in a way that is simpler or creative. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so when we're thinking about these levels of pests and damage, some of the different things to think about are, is it a low value crop or a high value crop? Are you going to be coming up with thresholds for yourself and what's important to you? Or can you find a fact sheet that actually tells you those numbers? And I'll be telling you those numbers for a few of the species we talk about today. This is the sort of complicated cost-benefit table that I present to farmers, where a lot of these thresholds are actually built off of. Broadly, this essentially tells you there comes a point with a pest population that if you are controlling it below that point, you're going to be spending more money on pesticides and other measures than the damage that the pest would actually do to the crop in the first place. And so that's called the economic injury level. I'm not going to sit on here too long just because I got a lot of slides to get through. When it comes to monitoring and record keeping, I'm a big fan of tables, spreadsheets, online, like Google has Google Sheets, which is free. And even if it's just your garden, it can be really fun to track things over time and look at trends. But what I really recommend is setting up weekly or daily repeatable systems, even for your own garden at home, where you track things like the date, the time, the place in your garden that your crops are, observation types, descriptions of what you see. Get creative and track what you see and what you do. Before we go into the different species and some of the different non-pesticide control measures I'll be talking about, I just wanted to do a quick slide talking about what things are and are not pesticides. So traps and monitoring tools, so like rodent traps, pheromone-baited traps. I'm sure you've seen those Japanese beetle pheromone bags before, sticky traps, mechanical methods, hand picking, vacuuming, and bug zappers. I don't recommend those, but those are not pesticides. Exclusion methods, so solarization, having row covers, insect netting, that is not a pesticide unless the netting has pesticide in it, then it is. And then beneficial nematodes, insects, and mites are not pesticides so long as they are hunting and infecting pests naturally, so already out there in the environment. They don't need your support to do so. They are kept alive and handled. You have to actually keep them alive and handle them properly, otherwise they'll die. And they don't persist long-term without pests to feed on. So in those scenarios are not pesticides. There's sort of this interesting thing though, microbial biopesticides. You may have seen Mycotrol or other products like it. This is Beauveria bassiana. This is considered a pesticide. It is EPA registered and sold as a commercial insecticide. And what is different about this, beyond the fact that it is sold commercially as a pesticide, is that due to other things added to the Beauveria bassiana, it's able to persist on the plant surfaces after application for a long time. And so that's sort of a little bit of a guide here. The Maine Board of Pesticides Control website has a lot of other great resources to help you understand these types of topics. Biological control is really awesome and interesting. It's one of my favorite areas of IPM. And this can come from insects or non-insect arthropods like predators and parasitoids, and also from entomopathogens. So that can include fungi, that Beauveria bassiana I just talked about, nematodes, and bacteria and viruses. And so even though fungi are considered a biological control, as I said before, if they're sold in a formulation, they are then considered and regulated like a pesticide. And for all of these different species and biological control agents, each species might lay somewhere between being a generalist or a specialist. So for example, we have a generalist rove beetle right here. They'll munch on hundreds of different species. But this parasitoid here, which is a parasitoid of the spotted-winged Drosophila, only parasitizes a very few species of Drosophila. So things can be generalist, eating hundreds of things, or all the way down to one species specialist. Here in Maine, or anywhere, sorry, there's three different sort of broad categories of biological control. Conservation, where you set up a good ecosystem for naturally occurring natural enemies to come and help you out. Augmentative, which is typically more just in greenhouses, really usually commercial greenhouses, where you purchase species that you release almost like a pesticide. You release them regularly to go and feed on and kill the pests. And classical biocontrol, which is actually when there's an invasive species from a different area, going back to that area and bringing that species here. And red alarms always go up when I talk about biocontrol. So here in Maine, it's really complicated to release anything from somewhere else. We do have an unrestricted list that Inland Fisheries and Wildlife puts out that you can check that list. And if a species is on there, it can be released into the wild. It's few and far between. It's not very likely that something is on that list because we don't want to disrupt the natural occurring ecosystem here in Maine. And if you, not really you, us researchers want to release a new classical biocontrol agent, first a permit has to be gotten from USDA APHIS. It's a really, really complicated system. And then if that goes through, then there is an additional permit to get from IF&W. All this to say, really, when it comes to probably the folks attending this talk today, please do not go on Amazon or another online web service and just purchase like insect eggs for biocontrol, because they're not, it's a potential that they're not actually approved for release here in Maine, even though you can purchase them online, and they could really disrupt the ecosystem that we have here. Okay, so we're going to dive in now to some of the common pests in gardens. We're really going to talk a lot about their life histories and how to identify them, because without proper identification, you really can't understand the organism of the problem that you're having in your garden. What I always like to say here is, imagine having a broken arm and you don't know that that is what's happened. What types of mistakes could you make trying to take care of that broken arm? Sort of the same thing with understanding the species that you have and its life cycle and where to hit it where it hurts the most. So we're going to start off with the Colorado potato beetle, which is sometimes called the potato bug. This was first discovered in the Rocky Mountains on buffalo burr in the early 1900s. And some of the key problems for this species include damage from them being able to both reduce yield and kill plants. It has also developed a resistance to many insecticides. And while it's called the Colorado potato beetle, it can also feed on potato, pepper, eggplant, tomato, and other nightshades, and even more. And so for each of these species, I have a little life cycle. So the adults are going to be overwintering. They spend the winter under the soil. They emerge in the spring to start feeding and mating. And over a 4 to 5 week period of time, females are capable of laying up to 600 eggs. Those eggs look like this. They're typically laid on the underside of a leaflet of the plant, and there's usually about 15 to 40 eggs per mass. Those eggs develop for 4 to 10 days, depending on temperature, and the larvae typically in Maine are going to be hatching and active from June to October. The small larvae feed on tender new growth. They have this really interesting slug-like appearance, and I really like this photo because it shows a younger and an older larva. So a lot of insects, even though you might see one picture, the color can range a little bit depending on their genetics and what life stage they're at. So this shows right here, we've got sort of a reddish younger and a more orangish older larva. And they actually can eat 40 centimeters squared of potato leaves per day, which I looked up, and that's something like, I thought I had put it on here, it's something like a quarter's worth of leaves per day that these larvae can eat. After 2 to 3 weeks, they're going to pupate, and they fall down and go below the soil underneath the plants where they fed. And in Maine, there can be anywhere from 1 to 3 generations per year. Again, kind of complicated. Sometimes those are overlapping. So what can you do? First of all, you need to identify it properly. The adults are 3/8 of an inch to a 1/4 inch wide. They have 10 alternating yellow and black stripes. And as I said before, the larvae are orange or red in color, and they have distinctive black spots along the side. You can see those right here. You're going to want to begin monitoring the plants every 2 to 3 days for adults in the spring. Remember, the adults emerge first. Look at the crop plants and also surrounding weeds. They might use those weeds first. If adults are found, search for eggs and larvae on the underside of leaves. And you can perform beat sampling to look for the adults and larvae a little bit more easily. So you can put a drop cloth of any sort, big piece of paper or like a drop cloth underneath the plant and use a stick or something to tap a bunch of plants at once and look at the insects that fall off. And again, this is just the year and the different stages that are present at the same time. Things are complicated. This is why you need to look every 2 to 3 days. There are actual thresholds. These are really more for like farms, but this can be something you can think about using in your own situation to start to take action for control. An average of 25 adults per 50 plants, 200 small larvae per 50 plants, and 75 large larvae per 50 plants. Hand pick adults, eggs, and larvae and drop into a bucket of soapy water. You can also use a small handheld vacuum cleaner to vacuum them right off the plants. And you're going to want to make sure to remove all life stages that you find. There's way more amazing information for farms on Andre's website, which is linked right here. I loved this quote from his website about hand picking the insects off of the plants. He says, "It can also be a relaxing and somewhat therapeutic experience. After all, from the biological point of view, we have evolved to be hunters and gatherers, not computer programmers or hedge fund managers." That made me laugh. I bet it'll make you laugh too. All right, hopping right into the striped cucumber beetle. These beetles are voracious feeders, and they'll even feed on the rind of produce sometimes. They're damaging on cucurbits, so squash, cucumber, melon, pumpkin. They can spread diseases, including bacterial wilt, cucumber mosaic virus, and squash mosaic virus. So really important to take care of these if you see them. The adults are going to be feeding first inside of flowers, and not only is this damaging to the plant, it can also prevent pollination and fruit set. And unmated adults are going to be overwintering. That's the stage that overwinters under leaves and other debris. So once they start feeding, they lay their eggs in the soil. And after 8 to 10 days, those eggs hatch. I couldn't find a picture of the eggs or the pupa for this species. The larvae then hatch and feed and can cause severe damage to the roots. So those eggs are laid in the soil, hatch, and feed on the roots. So this species is feeding on multiple parts of the plant. Over the course of 2 to 6 weeks, depending on temperature, those larvae go through several instars, and then they pupate in the soil. And after 7 to 10 days, they emerge as adults. In Maine, there can be 1 to 3 generations per season. To identify cucumber beetles, the adults are about 1/5 of an inch. They have a black head. They have yellow-green wing coverings and 3 black stripes. The larvae, again, they are down in the soil, so you're probably less likely to see them, but if you do dig up and look at the roots, they're going to be a 1/3 inch with dark on each end. So both their head and their tail end is dark. It's important to look for the adults emerging and feeding in the spring. You'll probably see them on willow or apple, goldenrod. So again, think about what's surrounding your garden. And this really starts when soil temperatures are going to be reaching 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Adults will move to the cucurbits as soon as they're available. That's their favorite snack. So they might be hanging out on some goldenrod, but once those cucurbits are available, they're going to hop right over. So it's important to go out in the early morning to look for adults, looking for damage on young leaves and in flowers. This is some damage on a leaf right here. And so you're really going to want to, if you can, look as close to daily as possible for adults to hand pick them. Those beetles can fly far. They can arrive daily. It can feel frustrating because you might pick hundreds off a plant one day and then go back the next, and you just got to keep going. I believe in you. You might want to think about rotating cucurbit crops to a new spot each year, looking into the wilt-resistant varieties of plants that you can plant, removing plant debris from the garden at the end of the year. That'll make it harder for the adults to find somewhere cozy to overwinter. Barriers or row covers can help, but they just need to be removed by midsummer so that pollination can occur. And finally, think about removing some of the alternative hosts nearby, like goldenrod and aster. Just a few more pictures. This is some damage to the root of the plant, the bottom of the plant. All right, hopping right into Japanese beetle. I know I'm flying through these, but we have a lot to cover. So these were accidentally introduced in New Jersey in 1916. Adults feed on the foliage and fruits of hundreds of species. They can feed on so many different things. And on top of that, the grubs also feed on the roots of the plant. Again, we got double the damage going on. They often destroy turf and feed on grasses. And so the adults emerge around the start of July and then live for up to 40 days. They typically produce 40 to 60 eggs in a lifetime. The eggs are then laid individually in the turf, 15 to 20 centimeters below the soil surface. The larvae hatch and feed from late July through August. And then once the first hard frost hits, they'll move deeper to the soil to overwinter where it's a little bit warmer. And then when things warm up again, sort of around May through mid-June, they'll start feeding again. They then pupate in around mid-June after feeding for a total of 4 to 8 weeks. Once the soil temperatures reach around 50, those pupa develop for 1 to 3 weeks, and then they emerge again as adults. The development time is really temperature dependent. And one thing I like to just have, I love this photo someone made from the Cornell's Grub ID tool I'll tell you about. This is a great photo. But it makes it seem like these larvae are massive. They are pretty big, but this is just a comparison. This is the larva on a penny for size comparison. And so to identify Japanese beetle adults, I think most people know what they look like, but they're a half-inch metallic green with copper brown wing covers and a row of white hair tufts. There's going to be 6 per side. You can see them a little better on this photo here, or the cover photo, which I meant to mention was taken by Gary. And the larvae are going to be C-shaped. They're about 1 inch when fully grown. Again, this is, I'll show you a little bit more about this tool. You can look at the size to help you identify the grubs and also these hairs on the back side of the grubs. I'll show you that tool in a minute. Adults are going to be causing damage to leaves that really they essentially skeletonize the leaves to the point that they look like lace. And again, they can feed on over 400 plants. A key sign that you might have some larvae in your turf is that skunks and crows might be coming and really digging up the lawn. And so there's a lot of different options for when and how to take action. For Japanese beetles, it's really great, and really for everything, to use a combination of all the different methods that you have. So for grubs, you can monitor for 8 to 10 per square foot and treat if found. This guide down here, the Gut Pests link and the DACF grubs gives a lot more details on how to do that and when to do that. Adults, really the best thing you can do is constant hand picking or vacuuming, although there's an exception here that I'll talk about in a minute. If you want to use one of those pheromone traps that you can purchase at the store, you need to place it at least 50 feet away from plants that you don't want to be damaged, because while it attracts Japanese beetle to the general area around the trap, not all of the beetles are going to go in. It's also important to empty it before it's entirely full. And there is some evidence that beneficial nematodes work in the last 3 weeks of August. Again, this DACF grubs link down here talks in a lot more detail on how to do that and how to time it. A quick aside again about these Japanese beetle traps. They typically attract more beetles than they capture, which leads to an increased feeding and damage on nearby plants. There's a joke in the entomology world that if you really want it to work, gift it to your neighbor, which isn't very nice, but it's kind of cheeky. And so, it just depends on the scenario. You can try it and see what happens, but not always maybe the best option. Now, there is a really cool biocontrol for the Japanese beetle, and it is sort of like the chest burster from the movie Aliens. It's called the winsome fly, and you can participate in conservation biocontrol for this species. So the adult flies are present in Maine. The adults are about 5 millimeters. You can see a picture of what an adult looks like right here. And how you can help is when you are hand picking Japanese beetles, if you see white dots anywhere on the beetle, typically they're on the green part towards the head, but sometimes you can find them on the wings as well. They're pretty easy to see with the naked eye or a hand lens as you're hand picking. Leave those beetles behind. Even if they're standing there feeding, don't touch them, because they're already like headed to the grave. So what happens is 1 week before the Japanese beetles emerge, these adult flies emerge from overwintering, and they start feeding on nectar-producing plants to get the sugar that they need to fly and lay eggs. So having, pollinator garden type things are also great for other insects that use pollen too. Nectar, I mean. And then what this adult female will do is land on a beetle, lay eggs. Those larvae will hatch within a few days, and they have little serrated saw mouth parts, and they'll bore right into the adult beetle. For 3 to 4 days, they feed inside the beetle, essentially sending it to its grave. That beetle will die within 5 to 10 days, and they actually overwinter inside of the beetle cadaver. So this is a dead beetle that's been broken open, and you can see the fly pupa. And so that's killed the beetle, and it'll emerge in the spring and lay more eggs. So really great option for biocontrol. Just a few more pictures here. There's an egg in different places. And just aside, just because you see a white grub doesn't necessarily mean it is a Japanese beetle grub. There's a lot of different species in Maine that are damaging grubs. We have a link here to lots of different fact sheets on our Gut Pests website. We have Japanese beetle, European chafers, June beetles, Oriental beetles, rose chafers, and Asiatic garden beetles. And I absolutely love this tool that Cornell Cows put out for Grub ID. It's a really easy click-through guide. All you need is a hand lens for when you find a beetle. It gives you that little penny image that I showed before to help you first understand which size it is. And then you use the hand lens to, yes, look at the butt of the beetle. That's how you identify it. But if you take a picture of this slide or you have the presentation as a PDF already, this brings you to their guide. It's really fantastic. Okay, tomato and tobacco hornworms. I think everybody here, if you have a garden, you've probably seen them. The photos on this slide are of tobacco hornworms. This is actually the species that's more likely to be seen in Maine gardens. These feed on solanaceous plants. So tobacco, tomato, eggplant, pepper, potato, and also some weeds. And these large caterpillars, they can strip a plant of foliage in a really short period of time. So another reason that it's really important to be monitoring regularly and having a system for yourself, even for your home garden, is so that you don't wake up one day to a surprise with all of your foliage gone on some of your plants. So the adults are going to be emerging in late spring or early summer. They're typically called a sphinx, moth, hawk moth, hummingbird moth. Those are some of the different common names you might hear. They truly are beautiful. Then they're going to be laying their eggs, which vary in color from light green to white. You can see what I'm circling right here on a leaf. They're pretty small. They deposit those on both the top and the bottom of the leaves, but more frequently on the bottom. After 2 to 8 days, depending on temperature, the larvae hatch, and they usually go through 5 instars. Again, they get pretty big. They feed for about 20 days and then pupate. The pupa are also really distinctive with the mouth parts developing in this little loop right here. The mature larvae, they're going to be dropping to the soil. They burrow 3 to 4 inches and pupate. And they spend the winter as pupa. So that's how they spend the winter in Maine, again, emerging in the spring as adults. How to identify them? The adults are going to be medium to large moths, typically mottled gray, somewhere around 4 to 5 inches. And the larvae have a horny spike on the tail end, pretty large caterpillars, and at their full length up to 4 inches long. The tomato hornworm and the tobacco hornworm, their striping are a little bit different. The color of the spike is a little bit different, but this is one, where once you know it's at least one of these two hornworms, you're really going to manage it pretty similarly. For monitoring, they can be surprisingly difficult to see even at their size. They're really well camouflaged in the leaves, and they're also more active at night. They damage both the leaves and the stems of plants, leaving behind dark green or black droppings that are surprisingly large if you've seen them in person. You're going to really want to hand pick into a bucket of soapy water. Some people like to feed these to their chickens. A trick that I've seen online, I haven't done it myself, I'd like to do it myself to get a good video for talks like this, is to get an inexpensive UV flashlight and go out at night. They light up brilliantly under the UV light, as do some other caterpillars too. So it might be a fun little experiment with your garden to go out after dark sometimes and check out what things look like with the UV light. And then just like the Japanese beetle, if you see evidence of biocontrol, you want to leave that caterpillar alone. And that evidence are these silk pupal casings. This is a braconid parasitoid called Cotesia congregata. These adult females inject their eggs directly into caterpillars, ouch, The parasitoid larvae hatch from the eggs and bore deeper into the host. They feed inside of the host. And then once they're ready to pupate, they chew through the skin, emerge, and they spin these little silk cocoons for themselves, and they're pupating in there. The adults are then going to emerge in about a week's time, and the caterpillar really doesn't feed much during this week. It's not doing too great. So if you see these pupal casings, sometimes there's just a few, sometimes the parasitoid laid eggs throughout the whole thing. Leave that because at this point it's mostly a dead caterpillar. All of these parasitoids will emerge and it's going to succumb to its injuries. There are several species of cutworms in Maine. The adults are typically brown or black moths with splotches or stripes on the wings. They have a 1.5-inch wingspan. The larvae are pretty distinctive in that typically they are curled up in sort of this C shape. It can be challenging to identify them to the different species, but there are guides for that I've linked. The caterpillars are mostly nocturnal, so it's going to be important to monitor in the morning to see this cutting damage that they do. They are especially damaging on corn, peppers, tomatoes, and beans. And you're going to want to look for plants that have been cut off, stunted, or killed. You're going to want to take action really by keeping crop areas as weed-free as possible, especially in the fall and the spring. Tilling in the fall can destroy or expose overwintering pupa. You're going to want to hand pick cutworms if you see on the plant after dark. I looked up online and I couldn't find any evidence if the UV light trick works on cutworms, but you could give it a try and let me know if it does. Bonus points if you send me a picture. And then you can also protect young plants with aluminum foil collars around the stems that are pushed about an inch into the ground. This UNM extension fact sheet gives more instructions on that. And if you do choose to use insecticides for cutworms, it's best to apply them in the evening. These are 3 of the species in Maine. And just to zoom in, so what I think is good to point out is this is an army cutworm here. This is also an army cutworm here. As I mentioned before, insects, their color varies within species. So typically there's things beyond color that we're going to be looking at for identification. Slugs and snails, can't give a garden talk without slugs and snails. They are closely related mollusks, which are gastropods. There's over 90 terrestrial gastropod species in Maine, and this gray garden slug here is the most common. You're going to want to be looking on wet and overcast days, or they're really more active at night. They overwinter as eggs and adults, and typically emerge somewhere between 32 to 40 Fahrenheit. They leave behind shiny slime trails on the ground, pretty distinctive damage to plants. I have some pictures in the next slide, and this is what their eggs look like. So to control them, again, it's this mechanical control is really great. So first of all, you're going to want to prevent them by not having a lot of damp hiding areas for them. So that's going to be like fallen logs and rocks. That's what they love to hide under, unless you're willing to check them daily. Because one of the best things you can do is to place traps like horizontal boards, rocks, and pots that you go out to every morning, check, and drop them into a bucket of soapy water. Just make sure you wash your hands after touching slugs and snails. Improving drainage can help. Having a bare cultivated perimeter can help a little bit. And if you see predatory beetles, just let them be because they'll eat them. People do sometimes also use beer traps. You can see some instructions online in these links for that. But the traps, placing them and then looking up underneath tend to be a little bit better. Egg on the tip of a pencil and some damage. I got to fly through to give Gary a chance to talk here. Couple of quick weeds. We have quack grass. These have long, flat, and tapered leaves. They're slightly hairy on the upper surface. These new shoots are going to be appearing in the spring from old rhizomes, and in the late summer from new rhizomes. Seed heads appear in July. It's really difficult with quack grass to do hand removal, and tillage can actually even sometimes make it worse by spreading those rhizomes. In small areas, you can try raking up any surface rhizomes and removing them. But typically, herbicides are really needed. There's instructions on some of these websites for spot treatment approach. This might usually be the solution when it comes to quack grass. Some more pictures here. And then finally, potato late blight. This is a very serious disease. If you suspect it, please contact Maine Cooperative Extension, their pest management office, if you think you have it. It's going to be causing brown, leathery spots on green fruit, which then turns brown to purplish black. In humid conditions, there's also white mold that can appear. The affected fruit often rots due to secondary bacteria and fungi. You're going to want to be monitoring your potato and tomato plants along with solanaceous weeds for this disease. It overwinters in coal piles, infected volunteer plants, or seed. And the ideal conditions are nighttime temperatures in the 50s, daytime temperatures in the 70s with rain, fog, or heavy dew. This is one, again, a cultural control alone or chemical control alone really isn't going to provide adequate protection during late blight epidemics. It's important to plant certified seed that's free of late blight. Eliminate any volunteer potatoes or coal piles if you're growing potatoes. Control solanaceous weeds, especially in the nightshade family, as they can be secondary hosts and reservoirs. And it's likely that fungicides will be needed depending on the timing if you have potato late blight. Here's some photos. And finally, powdery mildews. They're caused by a variety of fungi. This is a family of fungi, different one for each species of plant. Patchy white fungal growth on the surface of leaves. It's important to look for dwarfing and stunting of plant and deformation of flower buds and shoots. You want to scout the upper and lower side of leaves regularly. And, choosing to plant resistant varieties is really one of the best ways to protect yourself from this happening to your plants. Planting your plants wider, there needs to be airflow. This needs moisture. Pruning, again, for maximum air circulation. Removing infected leaves when you notice symptoms, and destroying infected plant material by composting it or burying it. A few pictures here. And I'm going to be handing it off to Gary now.
All right. Thank you, Hillary. So I guess go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk about pesticides. For 28 years, I was the manager of pesticide programs. I'm now the state horticulturist and supervise the plant health programs, including the Integrated Pest Management Program. So just starting out, we've been using pesticides for a very long time, and oftentimes we sort of see ourselves using them like the cowboy. And unfortunately, then sometimes we have made some mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes turn out to be really bad, and other times they're just maybe an insult to the ecology. And one of the points that I always make is that all pesticides have risks. Keep in mind that even things that are natural or organic or whatever, they're not safe, and all synthetic pesticides are not highly toxic. And there's lots of natural things out there that can kill us, like arsenic and lead and things like that. These two products that you see beside the natural does not equal safe. Full-X nicotine and rotenone dust. They're both, highly toxic. Rotenone is extremely toxic. It's never been available at more than 5 or 10% because it is highly toxic to humans. It's not even available anymore for homeowner use because it was eventually found out that it was linked to Parkinson's disease. Next slide, please. So I think that, it's really important that we understand that pesticides can be very useful, but we also have to not rely on them too much, because over-reliance has ended up in the past in pest resistance, as was talked about earlier with Colorado potato beetle. That really is one that has developed a lot of resistance to a lot of different pesticides. So IPM strategy is definitely to use what are called different modes of action. And one of the links that you'll see below those leaves is one where you can learn about the different types of modes of action. So when you choose one product for your first treatment, maybe you choose one with a different mode of action the second time around. And we've been using products for a long time. That ad is a real ad for black flag DDT. That is one that eventually many pests became resistant to, although it is still something that is used in other parts of the world to prevent malaria. In fact, when it's not used, when they use some other types of pesticides, they found that malaria levels were spiking back again. So they still use it in parts of the world where it's used very strategically. So it's not out in the environment causing the problems that it caused here, but it's being used indoors and on windowsills and places like that where mosquitoes light, and it controls them that way. And we still rely on pesticides today. I like this little roundup slide here that shows a place up in Canada where they were going to start banning the use of many pesticides. And just before that went into place, they really stocked up, and most likely a lot of people stocked up on Roundup. Next slide, please. So just to understand what is a pesticide, it's a lot more than what people generally think about. Often in the press, you'll hear them talk about herbicides and pesticides. And that's a misnomer because herbicides are pesticides. They're just one type. Usually, I think what they mean is herbicides and insecticides. But disinfectants like bleaches and Lysol and pine oil, those are pesticides. They claim to control a pest. Anything that is labeled to control a pest, other than what Hillary talked about earlier, are pesticides, and they have to be registered by the US EPA and in Maine by the Board of Pesticides Control. So weed and feed or Roundup, they're pesticides. Rat and mouse baits are pesticides. Any kind of plant disease controls, those are pesticides, usually called fungicides. 7, pyrethroids, Raid, those are all insecticides, which are pesticides. And many organic approved products are pesticides as well, like pyrethrum or some of the dipel, Bacillus thuringiensis, which are also biological controls. Something like milky spore, which unfortunately doesn't work anymore, is also a pesticide. And then we also even have wood preservatives and a few other things, fumigants and things like that. Next slide, please. And then we have some that are exempt from the Environmental Protection Agency registration. They're called 25B pesticides, minimal risk pesticides. I don't like to call them that because that's not really true. EPA made a decision to not register these anymore, but the state of Maine did not make that same decision. They are required to be registered in the state of Maine because we recognize that they have many different risks to people and the environment. And some, these have been deregulated, but they're exempt from toxicity testing by EPA. So we don't really know all of the risks from them, and they're definitely not risk-free. Even things like rosemary oil, peppermint oil, thyme oil, clove oil, wintergreen oil, cinnamon oil, they all have a high risk for some people. Next slide, please. So just to illustrate this a little bit, peppermint oil is something that's in a number of these EcoSmart products or other products that are out there. Its oral toxicity is 5 times higher than glyphosate, which is Roundup. It's linked to atrial fibrillation. It's phytotoxic to tomatoes and radishes. It causes allergic reactions and dermatitis. It also causes people to have asthma attacks. It's very toxic to cats and kittens. Cinnamon oil also is in a few. Same thing. Oral toxicity is 5 times higher than glyphosate. It's a very powerful skin irritant. It's an even worse sensitizer. So you can get one exposure to cinnamon oil and not really have much happen. And then the next time around, it really hits you hard. And cinnamon contains coumarin, which is linked to liver toxicity, liver cancer, and lung cancer in mice. So, that is something that you have to watch out for the dose on something like that. And breathing it in is one way to get a lot of it all at once. And you'll see that there are some precautionary statements on the label for breathing vapors. They've triggered breathing difficulty in asthmatics and others with allergies, physiological sensitivities, medical conditions, and so on. So they're not risk-free, that's for sure. Next slide, please. And then what about home remedies? A lot of people talk about making their own pesticides, and home chemistry is not recommended by the Board of Pesticides Control or by the plant health programs. Many of the materials that you use might seem safe because we eat them or we use them on our skin, but just like with those essential oils that are in the 25B products, exposure routes are very different and they make a big difference. When you eat a small amount of something, it goes through your digestive system and it gets detoxified. If you breathe it in, it goes directly into your bloodstream through your lungs, and in some ways, right through your sinuses and into your brain. So it's very different in terms of how you are exposed to it and what kind of risks that are going to result from that. So what we eat is not necessarily safe to breathe. Eucalyptus oil is one that is a good example. If you go to Medline Plus, which is a great National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health website, it says, eucalyptus oil is possibly unsafe when applied directly to the skin, likely unsafe when it's taken by the mouth. It's unsafe to children. So it is something that you want to be really careful about, even though if you go on the Global Healing Center website, it says it's a great natural pesticide for flies, bees, and wasps. Next slide, please. So in the old days, they had these very limited labels that didn't help reduce the risks and didn't show people how to use them properly. And I love this. We actually got this through one of our pesticide collection programs called Bug Death. It says sure death to potato, squash, and cucumber bugs, currant, tomato worms, etc. Prevents blight. So it does everything. And basically the directions for using are apply liberally with a perfection shaker. The more freely used, the better the plant will thrive. Cover plant evenly, will not deteriorate with age. Keep the powder dry. So wonderful directions there. It contained 5% lead oxide and 47% zinc oxide. And, it was patented to be used on lots of different things, but it was a pretty poisonous product that you needed to be really careful with. And, basically they said it was a good alternative to arsenic, which, maybe that was even more toxic. Next slide, please. So looking at today's conventional pesticides, this is kind of an example of one label you might see. So this is all down concentrate. It's a non-selective broadleaf and grass herbicide for use in organic gardening. It's OMRI listed. It's acetic acid and citric acid, 23% acetic acid and 14% citric acid. And then it has other ingredients. And on pesticide labels, the other ingredients don't necessarily have to be divulged. You may find them on a safety data sheet if you request that. And then you see below that the danger, peligro, keep out of reach of children. So that is your signal word on this particular pesticide. Danger is there because either it's highly toxic or it causes irreversible eye or irreversible skin damage. And all of them should say keep out of reach of children. And then you see directions for use. And I think this is a really important statement at the very top. It says it's a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. Read the entire label before using. My recommendation is before you buy a pesticide, you read the entire label. So either look for it online and find the label there, or where you're buying it, take the label off and read through it before you buy it, because you need to know a lot of things about it before you bring it home to use it. So then it goes into application directions, that it's a non-selective contact herbicide. It tells you how to mix it properly. And it gives you warnings like do not apply to desirable plants, do not apply to reactive metals such as aluminum, tin, iron, because it's acid. Do not use spray equipment with metal working parts. Do not apply more frequently than every 2 weeks. So it's giving you really important information on how to reduce the risk to yourself, to your equipment, how to make it work more properly. And then it gives you an idea of what weeds are controlled. In Maine, it's required that the actual site that you want to apply it to be listed on the label. It doesn't necessarily have to have the exact pest name on it, although it's a really good idea to have that. And then below you see an EPA REG number. So that's the EPA registration number. That's important because that tells you exactly what the formulation is. And the establishment number that's under that tells you where it was manufactured in case you end up with a problem with it. Next slide, please. Then it's going to have first aid information. With this one, it's going to cause irreversible eye damage. So it's going to give you information about how to take care of your eyes, your skin, if you swallow it, if you inhale it. It does have a note to physician here. So it causes mucous membrane damage. It may contraindicate gastric lavage. So what they're saying is don't make them throw it back up. You're going to want to use, some sort of material in the stomach to absorb it. And it gives you the poison center number. Then it has precautionary statements: danger, corrosive, so it causes irreversible eye damage. Do not get in eyes or on clothing. Wear protective eyewear such as goggles, face shield, and so on. So it's going to give you what you need to wear, and that's required because it's telling you to wear that, and the label is a legal requirement. It gives you some environmental hazards, for terrestrial use only. Don't use it in water, and basically keep it out of storm drains, drainage ditches, and things like that. Then it will give you some storage and disposal guidance, and how to keep it to make sure that it's out of reach of children, locked up, and not going to have something go wrong with it that's going to make it not work for you. Next slide, please. So my recommendations is that when you're going to go to purchase a pesticide, if you need to do that, measure the area that needs to be treated, how many plants, how many square feet of lawn, whatever it may be. Only purchase what you need. Don't over purchase, because we end up then having to dispose of it later on in an obsolete pesticide collection program. Check the label for reentry. So the label will tell you, can you go back in after the spray has dried, or does it require you waiting a little while? Does it have the site on the label? Does it say use on a lawn? Does it say to use in the garden? Does it say to use, along your foundation or something like that? It needs to give you that site. And then hopefully the pest is there as well. And that one that I showed, it could be the weed, specific weed, the specific insect, something like that. And then if you're going to use it on an edible produce, you need to look at the days to harvest and make sure that that if you apply it, you're going to have enough time to then let that stay on the produce until it's time to harvest, or is it going to go by and you're not going to be able to harvest? And what protective clothing do you need, and make sure that you purchase that when you purchase the product. Next slide, please. So then prepare for the application. You want to read the label again, wear all the personal protective equipment, make sure you mix it appropriately. More is never better. More can end up either causing damage, or in some instances, more will actually make it so the product doesn't work properly, especially with herbicides. And then never use more than the label directs. Next slide, please. And then, ideally, you only treat the infested areas. Broadcast application really is not necessarily in most situations, and it just overuses the product. Spot treatments are best. They conserve those beneficial organisms that Hillary was talking about. Keep the plant's condition in mind. There are some pesticides that if you apply them to really stressed plants, they may actually cause more damage because they have oils in them. Or if they're soaps, they're going to remove the protective layer on the waxes on the leaves and can cause problems that way. That's why I don't recommend that people use like liquid detergent or something like that, dish detergent on plants. If you apply it too many times, you're going to kill the plants. Then you want to make sure you check for coverage. If the pest is underneath the leaves, make sure that you're getting underneath the leaves. And then, as with any IPM strategy that you use, you need to monitor and see if it's working or not. And then only repeat an application if the label directs you to do that or allows it. Next slide, please. So again, broadcast applications to lawns, they can cause weird results, especially with herbicides. I don't recommend them. I don't recommend using weed and feed. Spot applications are a lot better in terms of the overall outcome for the lawn and for the weed control. And just keep in mind that the law does not allow broadcast applications of any pesticide within 25 feet of any wetland or water body without a special permit. And that's something that you have to go to the Board of Pesticides Control for. Next slide. So, this is a website that the Integrated Pest Management Council offers, as well as the Board of Pesticides Control. It's called Got Pests. It's gotpests.org. And it can really help you, find good solutions for a lot of the more common pest problems that are out there. And it's broken down by, where do you find the pest? Is it home, lawns and yards, trees and shrubs, and so on? Or you can also search by what kind of pest it is. Is it a weed, a disease, a bug, another critter, or just put the name into the search. So there's many different ways to look for that. It also offers up in the upper left-hand corner a drop-down, is it a pest? And that includes a link to beneficials. So beneficial organisms that we have here in the state of Maine, and gives you pictures and lots of information on what those beneficials might be that you can conserve in your yard, as Hillary was talking about earlier. And that's, I think, pretty much it, unless you want to add something else, Hillary.
No, I think that's pretty much it. If you ever have a hard time finding this site, if you have a pest like tomato hornworm, if you just go into search like Google or something like that and say tomato hornworm Maine, it's usually like the somewhere between the first and the third link that shows up after all the sponsored stuff at the top. So if you remember got pests, you can Google like got pests, whatever. So there's multiple ways to find it.
Excellent. Wow. I learned a lot, and I've been doing home gardening and small farming for a long time. Excellent. And right to the hour. That's also excellent too.
So I see a couple of questions.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions, and I know you have access to them, so you can read them. I had a couple of questions. One is if you store let's say BT that's pre-mixed in the barn over the winter, does it kill the bacteria? Do you throw it out or take it to the appropriate recycling?
Well, because BT is not living necessarily, it's the spore. It may still work. I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that, but it's a crystal that is eaten by the insect and disrupts their gut. So it may still be okay, but I don't know. Hillary, do you know any more about that?
No.
I left everything out in the barn. I was supposed to bring it in.
No, I wouldn't recommend that, but
Okay.
I think it might still potentially work.
Okay. Another question I have is pyrethrum, the painted daisy plant. Now, unfortunately, it's a short-lived perennial, only about, seems to me like 3 years, as best I can get out of it. Would planting, so you put nasturtiums as a trap crop for aphids, for example, would having a large collection of pyrethrum painted daisy plants take out the good and the bad insects, or is that not really going to work?
So that's sort of a chemical ecology question. So insects typically, unless there's certain things, typically aren't going to feed on something that's going to kill them. They have very strong senses of smells, and evolution has taught them not to. But things happen. Like, for example, I've had a program for a few years about the biocontrol for the invasive swallowwort plant here, black swallowwort, and something about the chemical smell of that actually confuses monarch butterflies, and they do lay their eggs on it. There are sort of these ideas of a push-pull system, which is where instead of eating it and dying, they might be repelled by the smell. So I'm not so sure there. If you email me, I can look into that a little bit. But yeah, insects aren't typically likely going to eat something that they know that doesn't smell, I guess, right.
Yeah. I've had deer eat tomatoes and delphinium.
Yeah, I've had them eat potatoes.
Yeah, they really shouldn't.
Right.
I hope they're not too sick, but sick enough that they don't feel so good. But there are some questions. So with all the risks, why are the 25B pesticides allowed for sale in Maine?
Okay, so that one basically because it would be hard for the Board of Pesticides Control to justify not registering them. So not all of them are. There are some that have been turned down because their labels are not specific enough. They're not giving enough warnings, or they're, maybe a formulation that doesn't look like it should be something that should be registered in the state. But for the most part, they are. And if I had my druthers, they wouldn't be. But that's just a situation that would be hard for the BPC to justify not registering them.
Okay. A couple other questions. What happens when an individual or business is found to have improperly used a pesticide?
So that is where the Board of Pesticides Control comes in. If there is a complaint to them, an inquiry to them, they'll go out and have one of the 5 inspectors that cover the entire state do an investigation. And if someone is found to use a product inconsistent with a label, then that person is subject to penalty. And unfortunately, the BPC penalties are not really huge for a first-time offense unless they can find multiple offenses. You're really rarely going to see anything more than $3,000 maximum on a first offense. There have been penalties that have been as high as in the 20 and 30 thousands for companies that have had multiple violations. And if they violate within a short period of time, after their first violation, then the amount of penalty can go up quite a bit. Or again, if you can find multiple violations, then they can add that up and make it a little bit higher.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, when you see the word organic on fruits and vegetables at the grocery store, does that mean they are pesticide free?
No. So organic growers use pesticides. There are certain pesticide products that are either approved by the National Organic Program. So the National Organic Program is part of USDA. It's been in place for a number of years now, where they allow certification organizations throughout the country to certify growers as organic. In Maine, it's the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, although some Maine growers don't use them. They use other organizations throughout the country to give them their certification. So if they want to sell produce that says certified organic, then they have to be under one of those certification organizations. They'll be inspected, but there is a very long list of pesticides that they can use. They're all either derived from natural sources, or there are quite a few as well that are not, that are approved by the National Organic Program that they can use. If they're going to use something, they have to make a plan. They have to work with their certification organization to do it. But the majority of organic produce that you find in the store has been treated with a pesticide, especially fruits. Apples, organic apples are sprayed a lot. Most organic fruits are sprayed a lot, either with a fungicide like sulfur or possibly with a pyrethrum, or there's a couple of other insecticides. Spinosad is one that's used a lot by organic growers. So if you go to the USDA, they have a pesticide data program. So if you Google USDA pesticide data program, you can download all of the samples that they take year after year, and they include organic samples. And you'll see that organic foods are treated with either organic pesticides, and they're not really organic pesticides, they're approved for organic use, or even sometimes they have some leftover pesticides that may be in the soil from where it's being grown. They have to wait 3 years before they can do that, but there still could be legacy pesticides there, or there could be pesticide drift that goes on to some of those or produce that you might purchase, but definitely doesn't mean pesticide free at all.
Going back to when I was doing the Master Gardener program, I think they said that the top 5 most deadly pesticides were organic. Is that accurate?
So there were definitely organic pesticides that were very high in toxicity. So I showed one of them earlier, nicotine. Nicotine sulfate is probably the most toxic pesticide ever made, other than maybe some fumigants that they're so toxic that you can't go inside when it's being done. In terms of taking it orally, nicotine sulfate is one of the most toxic. Rotenone, same thing. If you look at the 100% rotenone, that is extremely toxic. Probably beyond that, there's some metals like copper. Copper is not super toxic, but could easily overdose on that if you took too much of it. And sulfur, same thing, still less toxic. But there certainly are plenty of natural pesticides that are pretty toxic to humans.
I think another important thing to think about in sort of this discussion is it's an equation, risk equals toxicity times exposure. And so sometimes the products that might initially be at least less toxic, you might have to apply more frequently and more of it. So for example, I did some of my PhD work in an organic apple orchard in Pennsylvania where there's a lot of moisture and fungicide needs to be used a lot. And the apples in that orchard, I couldn't even see them through the thick layer of different things that had to be sprayed on them. And of course, they're washed and it's all approved. And I'm not saying organic is bad, but I'm just saying I think it's really important to remember that even if initially the toxicity of a product is less, if it needs to be used more, that overall risk equation might look a little different.
Okay. And the last question, and then we'll let you go. Best way to repel tomato hornworms?
I don't know if I came up when I was reading about them, if I really came across something that repels them. I would really say that if you're able and willing, going out with the UV light at night and hand picking them into a bucket of soapy water. And if you're not comfortable with straight up touching them, I mean, I've done this, and the way that they grasp on can kind of hurt a little bit, just wearing a pair of gloves or gardening gloves. I think that is going to be, especially in a home garden sort of scenario, I think that's going to be a good way to go.
I guess I'd mention, companion planting. It's not what it's been meant to actually do. There's a lot of better research that's been done on companion planting and really not shown that it's very effective. It's certainly something that can be tried. It's good for pollinators, but in terms of preventing pests, it hasn't really been able to show itself in real trials where you've got a really well developed experiment.
Okay.
And last question to answer. I answered it typed, and I didn't know it would go away. Someone asked about jumping worm remedies and unintended consequences, and I can't go into all that, but I put in the chat, please email me if you are interested in learning more about jumping worms. I have a free virtual workshop coming up in June. If you email me, I'll make sure you get on a list with the information about that.
Excellent. Thank you both very, very much. That was excellent. I always enjoy learning about these things. Makes my life easier when I'm growing. And so thank you. And if you're in Camden, come say hi to us at Mary Spring.
Will do.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining Mary Spring Nature Center's recorded Tuesday talks. For more information, please visit maryspring.org. We hope you'll consider supporting Mary Spring. You can donate securely at maryspring.org. Give the office a call at 207-236-2239 or mail your check to Mary Spring Nature Center, P.O. Box 893, Camden, Maine 04843, and make your check payable to Mary Spring Nature Center. Thank you, and we hope to see you again.